You never let anybody go through that curtain, walk the aisle, and get into a ring that you wouldn't get into yourself. All right, the secrets of the ring reveal. The wrestling rings. Wrestling rings are not just a prop. They are a very important tool, but the safety or the danger factor, more importantly, and more negatively importantly than anything. A good ring, you'll never notice. A bad ring, you're going to know right away. And I've been in a mixture of both. I've been in WWE rings. I've been in ECW rings. I've been on tons of independent wrestling. I've been in Japanese rings. I've been in European rings. I've been in all sorts of Ring of Honor, WCW, TNA, six-sided ring. I think we have a dedicated segment in the future just to that. And I have to say, it takes a lot. Now, I mentioned all these rings. When you get used to a ring, it's awesome. But when you got to switch over, say from a WCW ring to a WWE ring, we're going to talk about sizes in a second. And I think even when you switch from a WWE ring to the WCW ring back in the day, that's really, really tough because you're used to a number of steps across the ring. You're used to ropes versus cables. You're used to a particular type of turnbuckle. Even in some rings, this is the weird part, especially if you're getting thrown out, the height of the apron. Some independent wrestling promotions would literally have you wrestle in a boxing ring. And the boxing rings are only like maybe a foot off the ground. They don't need to be that high because the boxers are wearing gloves. They can't step into the ring like a pro wrestler. So they can't make it normally 4 feet high, something like that, 3 to 4 feet high. It's got to be much lower. So I know you have some general questions. We should probably get into that because then we can really differentiate what differs in each ring.
Okay, then. So we'll sort of end this segment on the comparisons between the major promotions rings, but I've got a lot of questions here. So are smaller rings more advantageous, as in less running, or do certain moves like a monkey flip become more perilous because you're always constantly near the ropes?
Both. And then we talked about the vanilla midget stuff earlier. The smaller rings are obviously going to have less effect when you're especially back pumping or front pumping. Say the monkey flip, say a peel out of the corner, say even if you're taking a superplex and you have two really tall guys and it's in a 16 by 16, which is most independent rings are 16s, WCW's 18, and then WWE's famously 20 by 20. When that happens, I've seen independent shows where guys' heels off a superplex have hit the turnbuckle or the rope on the other side. So there is a real danger factor. Running can make it easier, but then again, say you go from a WWE ring to a WCW ring and you have 2 feet less in diameter, which is basically maybe about a foot less on each side, maybe a little bit less. But we're talking about depending upon your height and size. For me, going from WCW to WWE ring, it's an extra step to a step and a half each way. Now, if you go from that ring and you're saying, duck the clothesline, hit me with a drop kick or whatever, or duck my clothesline, I'll drop kick you, and the person's running. In a smaller ring, they're hitting your back before you turn around for the drop kick. That's where a WWE ring gives you the time to drop down, leapfrog, turn, hit a guy with a drop kick, backdrop. There's another bump. A backdrop, if somebody doesn't step forward enough, well, let's say this, in a WCW ring or a small independent ring, if somebody's taking a backdrop and you're giving it, you now have to measure that distance where you would take normally a full step or two in a WWE ring to backdrop somebody and give them the room to take the bump. Now in a smaller ring, you have to now figure out if I step too close, I'm crowding them. They're not going to be able to base and take the backdrop, but they'll have enough room to bump. If I wait too far back, they're going to have enough room to post and go up, but their hamstrings could be hitting the top rope. It's really, and in my estimation, we'll get to the end what I prefer, but I think by what I'm saying that I prefer the bigger rings. More room to work is always a good thing. Then you introduce tag team match, 6-man, 8-man, battle royal. I sent you a picture. Big Chris can B-roll some of the photos. Guys standing in a WCW ring look like they were on a subway. It's like just like this, commuting to work. The WWE ring obviously had a ton of guys in it, but there was still some space to kind of get your space in there. I think that's a good representation of just the size difference in the rings.
Next question is, we've already dealt with the heights of rings and just the difficulty, of like beeling out sometimes. Did WWE ring construction change over the years?
I'd say it had to. My information that I got secondhand, which by the way, I sent a video. We can link it in the description below. There's a guy that actually was the head of developing these rings, especially for WrestleManias in cold weather like MetLife Stadium. That's a fascinating video. I think we put that in the description. That's an official WWE video, and it just shows how WWE puts so much thought into everything. It's like stuff you and I would never think of, and obviously other wrestling promotions do not think of. The heights of rings, yeah, if it's too high and you take a bump out and you overshoot or you land weird, that can be a thing. The construction changed over the years in the way that during the Hogan Andre era, which by the way, I'll tell you a story after I answer the question. I wrestled in the WrestleMania 3 ring up in Wisconsin. They needed, and let's put Yokozuna, Mabel, these guys that would break a normal ring. These rings were reinforced. So then poor Randy Savage has to drop that elbow every night on a ring to support Andre the Giant. So I think they came up with a happy medium. WWE rings, at least when I left in 2008, still the hardest rings to bump in. And you need to acclimate yourself and condition yourself. You can wrestle all you want on every other show. You take one bump in a WWE ring without being prepared or trained for it, or taking bumps, in a wrestling school with it, it's going to knock the wind out of you. It's almost going to feel like you broke your back. It's very, very tough. But I think they have a happy medium, at least towards the end of my run. They had a happy medium where it kind of bounced. But Vince also, from my estimation, what I heard, I think it was from Terry Taylor and Vince Russo, he hated that movement in the ring for TV. I think the first time he really noticed it was when they were going to Saturday night's main event, and they had a huge casual fan audience. And he didn't want the ring to look like a fake mattress that bounced. So it's changed quite a bit. And I think they're still trying. If I'm guessing correctly, if I'm guessing correctly, they're taking into account, since there are smaller wrestlers in 2024, taking into account the longevity, the safety, the health concerns, and really testing that ring out to make sure, okay, how many bumps does this smaller and women? Let's talk about the women bumping. If women had a bump in that Andre and Hogan ring, oh my God, I could barely survive it, and they don't have the fat that I have on my body, to be able to do it. So yeah, I love that video. When I watched that video, James, of that guy breaking it down, he was like the ring designer version of the whiteboard. So detailed, so awesome.
Let's get to some safety stuff then. So I'll skip how long it takes to put up and break down a ring. Did we talk about this? We have a
time lapse of that, by the way, if we can put it up.
Yeah,
I sent you a time lapse video of that.
Okay, we'll put that up while I ask you this next thing. So, how do you check ring condition before wrestling in it? Because I've heard various different stories. I mean, obviously, some stuff like checking like exposed nails or something. But to test a ring out for safety, how would you go about it?
First things first, you would get up. I would walk around the apron to see if there's any. The number one thing for me would be lumps, bolts, and holes in the ring. That would be what I would be searching for. So I would get there. I would get there. and walk around the apron, test it out. I would also test the ropes or the cables out to see if they're tight enough. And this is usually like after it's all assembled. So they don't have much time because on an independent show, they're putting the ring up maybe even as the doors open, they're finishing up. So you don't have a whole lot of time. But if I'm on a show, I would hope that they would put up the ring and get everything set up before doors open, which I think more times than not is the case. When I get into the ring, before I even run the ropes, which you famously see, a lot of wrestlers just run the ropes to test it. I will do the same thing. I will walk in a circle until I get towards the center so I can cover like a grid almost around the ring towards the center. And if I detect a hole, bolts, any of that stuff, I'll alert the ring crew and ask them, hey, can you guys fix this? Or maybe there's a board missing. And if they don't do it, I have to take the appropriate action or inaction to not bump in that ring. And there will be times I won't because it's just, you take a back bump, you land your back on a bolt, you could be done. You can break your back just like that. So that's what I would look for. The layers of the ring, I don't know the exact construction, but obviously you have the metal underneath the girder, like the metal girders. You usually have wood, you have rubber, you have some other materials, you have some foam, and then you have the canvas. Some places put metal for, WWE, I think, had a composite like Formica during the Andre Hogan stuff because it would not give, it would not break. More times than not, the people putting up the ring do care, but you have your times here and there where they just want to put up the ring, get back, start drinking, or they're working that night, so they need to get ready for their match. So welcome to independent wrestling. WWE, they have that ring up like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, because they would train, they would bring people in that would have dark matches and test them out and run drills. And they pay attention to every nuance and detail of ring safety. So that's the most important part is getting the ring up in time so the talent can test it out.
I've heard once that to test out the safety of a mat or, maybe loose boards, it's best to walk around the ring in bare feet. Is that something you've ever heard of?
I haven't heard that, but I would think the more weight that you have, or the more you're in full gimmick and full gear, what you're going to wear when you're running the ropes or walking around, because you can walk around and not detect anything barefoot, but the boots add a certain level of weight to you, and then walking isn't going to expose the deficiencies of the ring. Running well, running the ropes. I'm not talking about fast. Running the ropes will determine if the ropes are tight enough, if the ropes are high enough or low enough. Sometimes they make them super low or way too high. Make sure that the posts aren't going to come in as you're running the ropes.
Mm-hmm.
These are the tests right there. Make sure also the mats sometimes are not taut enough. So there might be wrinkles in the mat that you can trip over. Believe it or not.
Chris Candido famously broke his leg in TNA because of that. Yeah.
Because there was a lump in the ring and the ring canvas was kind of like up. You can easily trip over that. So running the ropes with boots on and going and even running the turnbuckles and like taking a turnbuckle to see if the opposite post is going to just cave in like Big Show and Brock. The ring collapses towards the center. That's a great spot, but not when you do the first spot in the
match. Very, very briefly, is it the referee's job to check for ring deficiencies, or is it the wrestlers or whoever?
Everybody. Yeah. Everybody. And everybody, first match, if there's a problem, tell the second match. Or if it's a big enough problem, you got to tell the promoter and tell the next match, don't go out there. We got to fix the ring. That's everybody's got to work as a team. No matter, we talked about Brett and Sean earlier, personal feelings, all that. No matter how you feel about anybody in that ring, you never let them go, or outside the ring, I should say, or personally, you never let a fellow talent or personality, ring announcer, referees, anybody get into that ring willing or knowingly knowingly knowing, jeez,
Mm.
here we are. We're 2 hours in. You never let anybody go through that curtain, walk the aisle, and get into a ring that you wouldn't get into yourself. You don't do it.
This is WWE centric, but how heavy are the stairs leading up to the ring? Because, you know, Jim Ross would say that's anywhere between 150 pounds and 150 tons. So how heavy are the stairs generally?
They're pretty heavy. I would say I would average 75 or 100 pounds.
Just the top half.
Yeah, top half is pretty heavy because you're talking about steel to some point. It's not aluminum, it doesn't bend. And the whole and my back is hurting just thinking about it. Grabbing it from the handles and dead like using it like a strongman competition, like those big boulders, and then having to protect somebody. They're heavy, dude. I've never picked them up. I've been hit with them. I've done the back thing where they did that. And yeah, I think that's where the 150 tons comes in because it felt like someone dropped a Mack truck on my back.
Next, we're okay. Different. Did WWE have different rings for the house shows than they did for the TV?
Not different in size, not different in quality. And now I think they do run the house shows like TV shows with Titantrons and stuff like that, even some pyro here and there. Back then, it would be certain rings in certain like areas, Midwest, North, South, Southeast, Southwest. WWE, man, like I said last week about the trucks always traveling, they have rings everywhere and they kind of leave them there. I'm sure they have like probably 2 or 3 rings in Europe, you know, that they go over there to use them. That's it. They invest so much money into these rings. But the house show rings compared to the TV rings would probably not be steam cleaned for TV, would not be the best aprons. Now, the actual rings and ropes and turnbuckle, yeah, they need to be uniform and they need to be just as safe as a TV, live TV or a TV taping. But yeah, they didn't skimp on anything. I don't know if that's the case with AEW. Did they even run house shows?
Well, WWE are barely running house shows at this point. AEW are running even less. So, I mean, that's something for another show, obviously. Right, we're going to talk about the mats briefly. So this is the canvas, actually. Do you clean the canvas when it gets mucky? Can you just not clean it? Do you just have to replace it?
I believe they steam cleaned it. I believe there was like a commercial steam cleaning or they had the equipment to do that. I know that they would sometimes steam clean or vacuum it. They would definitely vacuum the ring at WWE. They did so many different things as part of their standard operating procedure that's just really stuff you don't think about. Of course, you vacuum the ring, it gets dirty, you know? But then again, also, you have to book the show according to what you're doing. You can't have the first match on a TV show with tons of blood, and then for the next 3 hours, you have blood all over the ring. And WWE, by the way, is really great. Remember, they used to do like 205 Live, or they would do these different things after Raw or SmackDown, even ECW. The way the crew would switch the apron, switch the ring, switch the turnbuckles, switch the ropes in like 15 minutes. It's crazy.
One more thing about mats. Have you ever wrestled in a ring with a vinyl mat rather than canvas?
Yes. Tarp.
Okay. There's got to be a story in it.
What a slippery slope, all puns intended. And it started to rain.
Oh, it was outdoors?
In Miami.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. Outdoor tarp mat, boxing ring in Miami. I have to say, during rainfall.
What could go wrong?
And last match. So baby oil, everybody been slipping around. Yeah, it was great. So much fun.
Right.
I'm not going to tell you how much I got paid for that.
Well,
I'm
Miami.
Not going to tell you, but you can guess.
Okay. I was going to say Miami. Good. It might be, half a gram, I guess. Who knows?
No, you can't buy me with that. Most of the boys you can, but not me.
No.
If you hand me a video game, maybe.
Okay. Technical question now, because I know you like technical questions audio-wise. How do you mic a ring? And did ECW mic their rings in the day?
I've honestly never seen a mic under a ring. Now, WWE, I believe, especially at the Garden, had that cool old school microphone that Howard Fink, and then would go the Mr. Kennedy one. It would go
Mhm.
back up. That I believe is the extent of miking the ring and miking the crowd. Now, sometimes I've heard they would mic the crowd and drop mics over the crowd to sweeten the sound. Now they do it like basically technology based with a soundboard, but I don't recall a mic ever being underneath the ring. Now I have watched shows where I'm like, oh my God, the ring has to be mic'd. But I've never personally been involved with that.
Do you know I was going to suggest one, and you were in the semi-main of it was Barely Legal. And I remember that ring sounding completely different to the ECW rings of old. I think I talked to Shane Douglas about this, and I think that might have been a brand new ring for that event, and that's why
Yeah.
it sounded different.
No, we actually got a good. We didn't have good rings at all. That was the ring with the nuts and the bolts and the holes and the peaks and the valleys and all that stuff. That was the one. We had to measure the curvature of the ring, not the curvature of the earth. So, no, but I remember Barely Legal was like, oh, we finally got a new ring. And that's why it was so loud, because that other one was so muffled, but you, it was almost like a stuffed animal. You were stuffing foam and just making it worse. And then we got a proper ring.
So, where are
Dude,
we now?
the microphones we cut the promos on didn't work half the time. Why would we waste a mic on a ring?
Speaking of rings, various rings, do all rings have generally a safe radius or like a safe bumping zone within the ring, or do they depend ring to ring? Because, you know, I imagine, let's say it's a 20 by 20 ring and the inner 10 feet are the safest, but does it vary?
You always want to end up trying to land as close to the center of the ring as possible. The reason being, no matter what way or what size a ring is or how it's constructed, you obviously have metal girders around the edge or a metal brace. Then you have metal that goes across. So, and then in the center, some do have a spring. Some have a spring in center to prevent the ring from collapsing. It's not about it bouncing or anything. It's about preventing the ring from just caving in. But if you get to the edge, that's why I don't understand, dude. I'm going to sound so old saying this. Power bombs on the edge of the apron, suplexes on the apron, Germans on the apron.
Well, they all lead to the finish, don't they? Oh, wait, no, they
all
don't.
All zero of them do. Yeah. That's the new tackle drop down hip toss. It's German me on the apron. But that's why workers have avoided it. There's no give. And also, a lot of times you get some sound, the audible sound of the crash of the body in the center is what makes people think that was a big bump. He landed hard. Not that's the apron.
Well, you hear the person go loud, you go, oh.
Yeah, if you hear if the person's grunt is louder than the bump of the ring, you're bumping in the wrong part of the ring.
Which rings, now this is a term that I'd never heard before until you mentioned it with the Brett and Goldberg video. It is which rings had the most bite, as in jumped up and sort of basically gives you a mini concussion by sort of like bouncing up and hitting you in the head.
Usually the ones with the spring. But then you have, it's a double-edged sword either way. You can have the WrestleMania 3 ring. It's not going to bite you after you bump, but it's going to bite you when you bump. That's for damn sure. So having longer hair allowed me to tuck my chin more so it wouldn't bite me. But when you're getting speared by Goldberg, no chin tuck's going to help.
Did you ever get to the point where you'd like just cover the back of your head with your hand or arm or something like that for certain bumps?
Okay, now where your arm is right there, like this.
Yeah.
Now think about when you're bumping. What do you think has a potential of happening with your hand back here?
A couple of different things. Your finger could be in the wrong position. You could break your finger. You could there's just bone on bone, I guess, so it doesn't offer you too much protection. You could throw out your shoulder.
That's the one. Yeah. That's the big one. You can dislocate your shoulder. You can have a rotator cuff injury. But what I look at it is you put the hand in the back of your head. Now the ring's going to come up and bite and maybe hyperextend your fingers, and you're still going to feel your head hitting the mat. It's just better to avoid, and sometimes you just got to take it. You just got to take it because It just happens. You're going to know when it happens. Now, hopefully, with wrestling training, James, you learn to duck. I mean, you should duck like I did with Rob Van Dam, then forgot to do. You have to tuck because guaranteed at wrestling school, 95 to 99% of the time, you're going to hit the back of your head. It's the only way you learn to properly tuck on a bump. So, but it's going to get you. That's it.
This next question is going to be something that, for like fans like me, will pretty much be able to guess it. But, for some people who are watching this who aren't like major wrestling fans or, just dip in and out or just watching this video and just wanting to know, what is hidden underneath a wrestling ring typically? And also, because we know with wrestling so many times a weapon is hidden under the ring as well, is it your job to put the weapon under the ring and make sure it's there, or is that an agent's job or someone else's?
I want you to try to answer how I would answer the question.
Okay. It is my job because it's my gimmick in my match.
That's a short answer. DTA. Don't trust anybody. Don't trust anybody. You ask somebody to do it, and then you give them the proper time. Because if you ask them to do it and you go out there and say, okay, I'll do it because I don't believe you're going to do it, that's not very political. You ask them to do it, an hour later, you can say, hey, here's how you do it. Not, did you put it under the ring? Hey, can I take a look at the stuff you put under the ring? I just want to make sure that the trash can or the chair or the table are safe and we can do the spot. I want to make sure I know where it's at. What are you essentially doing? You're following up, but you're not saying, I don't believe you. So you go out there. What's normally under the ring is all the tools and everything needed to build and break down the ring. Things go under the ring, get it, the tools, the wrenches, all that stuff. Also, if they have to switch over, they need spares. I think they do store most times the ropes if they need the ropes break or they got to switch and any smaller stuff. But if there is a spot where you need tables, chairs, trash cans, all that stuff, I think those will stay in the production box and be whaled out, in between shows.
Do WWE specifically, so let's say one table is going to be used in the show, that's what it's penciled in for. Would they put supplemental plunder under the ring just in case 2 or 3 are used and the options there?
Yeah, because, I mean, look at Botchmania. So I am the table. So that's a little shout out for them. But you can grab a leg and it can break. So you're going to need at least triple redundancy. That's what I would like. 3 tables for 1 table spot, just in case.
Okay, so we've got some ring construction questions now. Then we're going to get to the final questions and we'll wrap this podcast up. But I can already tell this is going to be our best so far.
What did you call them? What did you say?
No, I didn't say that. Damn it. Oh, for God's sake. We're never going to get this right. Right, ring construction. Do the rings have a frame or ropes going crisscrossing underneath to stabilize the posts? So what's more, is it like a metal frame or ropes more often?
It's like that, like the bike locks have the cable, like the security cable.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a metal cable. I don't think it has the clear plastic like bike locks do, but those are diagonal and those add the tension and keep the post from falling down.
So there's not a frame. So like a giant like X-shaped frame kind of thing. Just
not
like
a giant X shape. No, it's the square of the metal, and then across is the metal beams that go across. Then it's crossed with that. And then with the spring construction in the center, I'm not sure how that works. And if the beams have to be obviously not towards the center, they have to be spread out. And I don't know how the ring post tensioning would work, but I have seen rings that have that, especially WWE.
So older rings have springs under the iron. So I believe the irons is the terminology for the metal frame which the wood and the mats sit on.
Yes.
So why were the springs phased out and replaced with foams? And can you just explain what foams are?
Well, I don't know if I don't know if WWE had springs and replaced them. In other words, I've never seen a spring under a WWE ring. I've seen springs under independent wrestling rings, but the WWE one, I believe, it's just a tight. See, when you add the spring into it, you're adding movement, which like I said before, Vince hated for TV. So, and you could say, well, let's put the spring ring on the house shows to protect the talent. It's easier. But then by the end of the tour, that bump in the WWE TV ring, oh, it's going to feel even stiffer. So you got to be uniform across the board. So I'm not familiar. I got to do some indie shows and see. I'm not familiar with the current construction of the rings, but I will sacrifice my spine for you and the audience and do it.
If you give us enough money. Okay, we've got to
If
have an
you give us enough-
incentive. Yeah.
It's called the Dutch Mantel clause. You gotta pay.
He will do it, but have you ever heard of jacks under the ring to support rings further for like a battle royal or something like that? Have you ever heard of that kind of affair?
I'm probably a jack because the ring collapsed and somebody went out to their car and got a jack.
Yeah, maybe. Next one is turnbuckle pads. There's two different types as far as I can tell. The WWE style ones, which are like a square piece of foam. The old WWF ones were like almost like packing foam, weren't they? You know, George the Animal Steel would rip them out and eat it. And then the other one is almost like a vinyl covered one that wraps over and it's almost like a taco, I guess, and wrap it up that way. What is more comfy or less hurty, I guess, if I'm going to put it that way, to take a bump into?
Well, turnbuckles are hard for me. They've always been like my albatross throughout my career to take a good turnbuckle, like a Bret Hart turnbuckle, which nobody can take it like that. I personally would prefer the non-slippery version of turnbuckles because you're going to have backs, oily, people with baby oil hitting that, people on the top rope who have stuff on the bottom of their shoes, and they might slip off or the next person. So I like the foam turnbuckles, and I believe what you're talking about is when they encase the corner with the turnbuckle, they have to zip tie it with the little loops in the back to get it going. I prefer that, and I always love the visual, by the way, of not the Georgie Animal Steel, which is also a great visual, but when you're untying the turnbuckle to expose, or you're untying the pad to expose the bare turnbuckle, I love that spot. You know, rather than trying to unsnap it or unzip tie it or take wire cutters, it's better to untie it. It's more visual.
Rope or cable? So which is better? And are there different types of rope? Because I've actually heard there's rope and then there's like a hemp version of it as well that can sort of react slightly differently. But rope or cable? You're going to be political with the answer, I know.
You know?
No, I can just tell you went, and you're going to have like 50 for one, 50 for the other.
No, I'm actually leaning towards rope because of my style. Rey Mysterio, as we talked about earlier, had to make a major adjustment from WCW to WWE. Besides the size of the ring, springboarding is completely different. Top rope moves are completely different. Springboard topes are completely different. And if you didn't notice, if you watch one of my matches, you're going to watch all of them because it has none of that. Thrown through the middle ropes, you don't need to care about rope or cable. Now, for running the ropes, cables are much easier to give you a bounce off. But personally, I prefer to have control over that. And for some reason, I always remember we talk about Shawn Michaels run the ropes. Just the way he did in his back, and it would look like a slingshot. It had more give, and it looked like it catapulted him more than the cables, which had no movement. So that's why initially my answer would be, well, cables are tight, they're safer, you can do more with them, but the ropes always have more of a visual, like elastic type of look during the spots. And for me, somebody who doesn't fly, I like the ropes better. But for somebody that does fly all the time, I guarantee if they had a choice, they probably would love a 20-foot ring with cables in WWE.
Do you know, I prefer the ropes purely as a viewer because I like the visual texture of them. It makes it seem like a more traditional, like there's more history with it. With the cables, they're a lot smoother. And
what's funny about it too, boxing rings have ropes. So it almost makes it look more like a legitimate boxing ring. Then, dude, I did a deep dive before we even got online. And I was looking at like the time lapse. I was watching a video by the head engineer of the ring. Then I looked and I was like, people were saying these ropes that WWE, they import them and they treat them and they just a level of detail and maintenance that goes into just the ring. It's crazy. So yeah, I prefer rope too. Not only aesthetically, but as a worker. I guess I'm in more control running the ropes. I don't want somebody to bounce me back before I'm ready to go.
What type of ring ropes were more prone to breaking or failing?
We've seen more WWE rings. The ropes break. The top rope always broke for some reason. I don't know why, because everybody's running them. The cables, I would say the cables, I'm thanking God they don't break more often because what if they snapped and then you got lashed with the interior part of it or, it's encased in rubber, so that's good. But if you talk about getting bit in your back,
Mm.
that's it. And by the way, I'm just going to talk about running the ropes. If you don't grab the rope as you're running it and running into it, you are taking a horrible chance. Because I saw Mark Henry, I saw a couple other people, it snaps, and if you're not hooking, you're just gonna go backwards, or you're gonna go straight down, or you're gonna go onto your head. When you hook it, you at least have a chance of kinda collapsing with the rope instead of going out ass over tea kettle. So that's one thing. We can get into people that run the ropes horribly too, but that's another
Oh,
episode.
that there will be another video. Very quickly, which
And the people that run the ropes the worst are some of the people I am actually the closest with in wrestling. So it's truly objective. But I've told them this right to their face that they're awful at it.
which ropes hurt more, rope or cable?
Rope.
What?
Rope hurts. Rope burn. The cable kind of can get you, but the ropes have a
Friction.
kind of a gliding friction effect as you come off of them.
Ranking the rings from major promotions. So we're not going to have the 6-sided ring with TNA. That's going to be its own video. So we have WWF. We have WWE, which I believe at some point there was a switch around between the two, as you confirmed. WCW, the 18 by 18 foot version. We have ECW, the various versions. We have the TNA square ring. And we have Ring of Honor, 2016 version of the ring. So of all those, 7 that I gave, can you rank them for us as far as best to worst? I've written it at the bottom of the page there as well, so you can see.
Thank you. I've never wrestled in a TNA 4-sided ring.
Really?
Only a 6-sided, yeah. So we can eliminate that. We can talk about them switching and dedicate a segment to that in a future episode. So, number 1 ring I've ever worked in was the WWE ring. Number 2 ring, WCW. Number 3 ring, WWF. For the, talking about the WrestleMania 3 ring, I've worked a couple shows. That was all I needed. The last one that ranks last is the ECW ring. Because of what I said, before they switched over at Barely Legal, it was definitely one of the worst. And the funny part was that ring was a local indie wrestler, and that ring would follow me like a curse on the indie scene in the Northeast. It was like, and I knew exactly where the same bolts were and all the other stuff. That was the only saving grace, that I knew the ring, but it severely limited me on a lot of indies and ECW in some ways.